After we married, my sister-in-law started touching my things and taunting me with her words. My husband only ever said, "She's young, just let it go." I swallowed it. Until the day she slid a pregnancy test across the table. "I'm pregnant," she said. "It's my brother's. You need to leave. This family doesn't want you." I was silent for a long moment. Then I dug into my phone, scrolled deep into my photos, and turned the screen toward her brother, azoospermia. The blood drained from her face. She didn't know that I had already discovered her 5-year secret in the dead of that early morning. The man's heavy breathing I heard from her room, I would never mistake it. That man was her father. The day my sister-in-law first touched my things, I let it slide. I'd just gone to the bathroom, and when I came back, the package on the coffee table had already been ripped open. She was sitting on the sofa, smearing half a tube of my new hand cream up and down her arms. She looked up and grinned. "Not bad, Emma. A little thin, though. How much did you pay? Hope you didn't get ripped off." I stared at the shredded mailing box, took a deep breath, and told myself to drop it. We'd just moved in together as a family. It wasn't worth a fight. It didn't stop at hand cream. Imported chocolates I'd saved. She unwrapped every piece, took one bite, and tossed them back into the box. A 6-pack of yogurt would dwindle to one, the empty containers lined up neatly inside the fridge as if nothing had been touched. The worst was the face masks. Medical-grade hydrogel sheets, over $40 a box, 5 to a pack. One day I opened the fridge and found the box empty. I knocked on her door. She leaned against the doorframe, the last mask plastered to her face. "These are great," she said, her tone completely matter-of-fact. "You should buy more next time. You used them without telling me." She peeled off the mask and stared at me with exaggerated surprise. "Since when do we need permission to share stuff in this family? It's not about permission. You could at least ask." She tossed the used mask into the trash can. "Fine. I'll ask next time. Anything else? I've got a game to play." The door shut in my face. I stood there for a few seconds, then went back to my room. Ethan was at his desk, working late. He glanced up when I walked in. "What's wrong?" I told him his sister had been going through my things again. His eyes never left the screen. "She had it rough growing up. Your stuff is new to her. I'll replace whatever she uses." It's not about replacing things. This isn't the first time, and I've told you before. He finally looked at me, then looked away. I knew that look. He hated conflict. When we were dating, I mistook it for an easygoing nature. After we got married, I realized his easygoing only applied to things that made him uncomfortable. The moment a situation required him to stand up and say something, he'd go quiet, or stall, or promise to deal with it later until I eventually gave up. "She's just," he began again. "I know she had it rough, you've told me 100 times," I cut in. "But she's 24. She's not a child." He didn't answer. His keyboard clicked on, the glow of the monitor washing over his face. I couldn't read his expression. A cold realization settled into me. In the 3 months we'd been living in this old house, he had never once taken my side in front of his father or his sister. Every single time, it was, "She's young, she's had a hard life, just be the bigger person." Back in our apartment in the city, he wasn't like this. He'd complain about unreasonable clients with me, argue with the building management over bogus maintenance fees. But the moment we came back to his hometown, to this house, he transformed into someone else. When had he changed? I couldn't pinpoint it. What really made my stomach drop was the blouse. It was an anniversary gift I'd given him last year. $500, a month of overtime. He dressed plainly. The only decent shirt he owned was the one he'd bought for his college graduation interviews, its collar frayed. When I handed him the blouse, he blinked and said it was too expensive, I should return it. I told him no, put it on, let me see. He stood in front of the mirror, and the corners of his mouth twitched up despite himself. I watched his hand drift from the collar down to the hem, so lightly, like touching something he was afraid to damage. Next anniversary, he said, I'm getting you something just as nice. He did, a necklace, not expensive, with a note inside the box. When we have more, I'll get you one with diamonds. I kept that note in my wallet, right next to my mother's old photo. He never wore that blouse. It hung in the back of the closet, still in its garment bag. So when I saw Lily wearing it in the living room, I thought I was hallucinating. She was lounging on the sofa, sleeves rolled up twice, the hem falling to her thighs. The top button was undone, her collarbone bare. She had her bare feet up on the coffee table, a bag of chips in her lap. I stood frozen in the entryway, key still in my hand. Hey, you're back, sis, she said, waving at me. Crumbs scattered onto the couch. I changed my shoes, walked over. Who said you could wear that blouse? My voice came out flat. Anyone who knew me well understood that the calmer I sounded, the angrier I was. She crunched a chip, eyes on the TV. I got it myself. Why? That was a gift for your brother. He's never even worn it. So? She finally turned to look at me. It was just sitting there. What's the big deal if I wear it? Take it off. She laughed, not an embarrassed laugh, but the laugh of someone who thinks you're being ridiculous. You're way too tense, Emma. She put the chip bag on the table and stood up, a little shorter than me, tilting her chin up without a trace of nerves. It's my brother's shirt, not yours. And even if you bought it, you probably used his money, right? If you want to split hairs about what belongs to who, maybe you shouldn't have married into this family. Say that again. Did I stutter? She tilted her head. Your money is his money, isn't it? You live in his house, eat our food, and you're going to get on my case about one shirt. I worked a month of overtime for that shirt, I said, taking a step closer. He treasures it. You tore open the bag and put it on without a word to anyone. Who gave you permission? She didn't back up. Instead, a strange little smile surfaced on her face, not quite smug, not quite amused. It was the smile of someone who had finally gotten the reaction she'd been waiting for. Ask my brother, she said, her voice slow and deliberate. Ask him if he let me wear it. Ask him if he's let me wear things before. There was a hook buried in those words. I heard it. Lily Sullivan, I'm giving you one last chance. Go upstairs and change. And if I don't, then you can walk out of this house wearing it. The living room went dead silent. The amusement faded from her face. She held my gaze for a few seconds, then turned her head toward the kitchen and yelled, Ethan. My back tensed. My husband shuffled out of the kitchen. He'd probably been hiding in there the whole time, listening. He was wearing an apron, clutching a bunch of unwashed scallions, a little dirt still on his fingers. Tell her, Lily said, jabbing a finger at the blouse. Tell her how many times you let me wear your clothes before. Which ones haven't I worn? Tell her. I turned to Ethan. He said nothing. His mouth opened and closed, his lips trembling, but no words came out. The scallions dripped water onto the floor, forming dark little circles on the wood. "Ethan," my voice started shaking, anger bleeding through, "what is she talking about?" He still didn't speak. Just stood there in that ridiculous apron with a cartoon bear printed on the front, the one we'd bought at a supermarket in the city, when he'd promised he'd learn to cook for me. The bear grinned at me now, empty and oblivious. "Come on, Emma, don't push him," Lily said, folding her arms and leaning against the sofa. Her voice was lazy, almost bored. "You know how he is. He's terrified of arguments. He'll hide from anything he can, stall anything he can't. What do you expect him to say?" "Shut up." I turned and stared her down. "I'm talking to my husband, not you." "Fine, fine." She raised both hands in mock surrender. "You two talk. Take your time." She sauntered toward the stairs, pausing as she passed Ethan. "If you won't tell her, someone else will eventually." She threw a glance back at me, not triumphant, not mocking, but something else I couldn't quite name. Then she went upstairs, the old floorboards creaking under her steps. Ethan and I stood alone in the living room. "Talk," I said, planting myself in front of him. "What is going on between you and her?" His eyes reddened. "It's not what you think." "What do I think?" "I don't think anything. I'm waiting for you to tell me." My throat felt raw. "We've been together since college, Ethan. 8 years. What can't you tell me?" His Adam's apple bobbed. "Some things." His voice came out like it was being dragged through gravel. "It's not that I won't tell you. I can't. Can't tell your own wife. Especially my own wife." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "There are things that, once they're said, the life we have just ends. Do you understand?" I froze. It was the look on his face that frightened me, guilt, fear, and something else, something that looked like a man watching a fire he couldn't put out. What could end our life together? I fought to keep my voice steady. "Are you hiding something from me?" He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. In that moment, he seemed hollowed out, all the gentle, attentive Ethan I knew drained away, leaving behind a stranger wearing his face. A stranger with secrets that had been there long before I ever moved into this house. "Let me go on this business trip," he finally said, his voice wrecked. "When I come back, I'll tell you. Everything. You can't tell me now." He shook his head. "Not now. Right now." He glanced toward the ceiling. "It's not safe." I followed his gaze. The hall light on the second floor was still on. Somewhere above us, a floorboard creaked. She never turned that light off. "Fine," I said. "When you get back. I promise." He grabbed my hand and squeezed until my knuckles hurt. His palm was cold, clammy. I didn't squeeze back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed thinking about the breakfasts he used to bring me in college, always a sandwich and a carton of soy milk, the sandwich carefully made without cucumber slices because he knew I hated them. He'd wait an extra 5 minutes at the dining hall every morning so the cook could make a fresh one. One snowy winter day, he biked across campus to get me my favorite crepe, his eyebrows frosted white by the time he handed it to me. I called him an idiot. He said, "You said you wanted one." He wrote me letters, too. Real letters, on paper, slipped into my bag. We saw each other every day, but he said some things were easier to write. In one letter, he told me about growing up with a single father after his mother ran off, how he'd learned early that family was a fragile, breakable thing. He'd never thought he'd want to build one of his own until he met me. I still have that letter, folded twice, tucked next to the necklace card. He loved me. I didn't doubt that. But the man who had written that letter and the man who had just stood in the living room, dripping scallion water and saying nothing, were they really the same person? I told myself they were. It was this house that warped him, that resurrected an old, frightened version of him I didn't know. Once we moved out, once we were back in our own place, he'd be himself again. Weekends, he'd code, I'd sketch, and we'd curl up on the sofa at night and watch movies. No walking on eggshells, no dread coiled in my stomach. I fed myself this fantasy while quietly saving 6 rental listings on an app, 3 near my office, 2 in between, 1 close to his. I sent the links to an agent and booked a viewing for the weekend without telling him. Moving out would fix everything. I gripped my phone in the dark and closed my eyes. In the early morning, his father watered the vegetable patch in the courtyard. From the living room window, I watched him. A small, weary old man, bent over a bucket. He looked like any ordinary, harmless neighbor. Mrs. Patterson next door often told me how hard my father-in-law had it, raising 2 kids alone, being both mother and father. I'd always nod and agree. But deep down, I didn't agree. It wasn't that I thought he was a monster. I just felt he was off. Every time he walked past me, a chill crawled down my spine. He never said a harsh word to me, barely spoke to me at all. But sometimes I'd glance up and catch him watching me. Not in a leering way. Appraising. Like he was sizing up a tool. Every time our eyes met, he'd look away quickly and go back to whatever he was doing, as if nothing had happened. People like that are the hardest to deal with. No handle to grab, no crack to slip through. Just a pervasive, nameless unease. I tried to tell Ethan once. It was a weekend, his father had gone fishing, and we were alone. I said the way his dad looked at me made me uncomfortable. Ethan said I was imagining it, that his father was just a quiet, withdrawn guy who treated everyone the same. He doesn't look at Lily any differently, I said. Ethan said, how would you know? You've never seen them together. I thought about it. He was right. In this house, father and daughter barely exchanged words. When they crossed paths, they passed like strangers. I believed Ethan. Or I chose to. Because not believing him meant confronting a larger, more terrifying truth. I'd married into a house that made my skin crawl, and I'd shattered my own family to do it. I'd fallen out with my mother because I insisted on marrying Ethan. She told me he seemed like a decent man, but his family was too complicated. A mother who ran off, a stepmother who died, leaving behind a silent father and a stepsister. A child raised in that kind of home, she said, you never know what's buried inside him. I told her she was being prejudiced, that she hadn't even met him. She said, I've been around longer than you. I know a red flag when I see one. The last thing I said to her was vicious, if you don't approve, don't come to my wedding. She didn't come. My father came alone, in a faded suit, his tie crooked. I asked where Mom was. He said she was at home. She cried all night, he said. This morning her eyes were too swollen to open. She said if she came, she'd start crying and embarrass you. The night before the wedding, he'd called and told me she was home crying, her eyes puffed up like walnuts. I cried the whole night in my rental apartment. At the ceremony, when Ethan slid the ring onto my finger, my eyes were red. He thought it was happiness. I knew better. Now I hadn't spoken to my mother in almost a year. I'd blocked her number, deleted her on social media. Not out of anger, but out of fear she'd ask how I was doing, and I'd have to tell her the truth. Fear she'd say, "I told you so." Occasionally my dad would send a text, "How are you?" I'd reply with a single word, "Fine." I didn't dare say more. One more word and I'd have to admit I'd made a mistake. I had to be right. My marriage had to be happy. The dried bouquet from my wedding still sat in a vase on my dresser. Every time I looked at it, I remembered my father standing in the hotel lobby, telling me, "Your mom wanted me to say she loves you." It was the first time I'd ever heard him say the word love. I brought up moving out while Ethan was brushing his teeth. "After your trip, we move. I've started looking at places." He stopped, toothbrush in his mouth, staring at me in the mirror. "Dad's health hasn't been great," he said, after rinsing. "His blood pressure's up, something with his heart. We can live close by and come back if there's an emergency," I said. "But I cannot keep coming home every day to find my things ransacked." "Is that too much to ask?" He was silent. "Ethan," I said. He turned. There was something in his eyes I couldn't read, not reluctance, but fear. A deep, marrow-level fear, like he was afraid of something being uncovered. "When her mom left, Dad was awful," he said quietly. "After my mom ran off, he drank heavily. Sometimes he'd pull me out of bed in the middle of the night and whip me with his belt, saying I looked more like her every day. Lily was just a teenager. After her mom died, Dad never looked at her properly. She carried all of it by herself. So yeah, she can be difficult. But she's not a bad person." "I know she's not a bad person," I said. "But she's an adult. You can't protect her forever." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When I get back, we'll move. I promise." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, holding on so tightly I felt his shoulders quiver. I thought he was crying. I said his name. He pulled back, his eyes were dry. But that trembling, it didn't feel like sadness. It felt like desperation, like someone holding something he knew would shatter. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just, I'm so lucky to have you." I started looking at apartments in secret. A sunny one-bedroom with a newly remodeled kitchen. I stood in the empty living room and imagined where our couch would go, the TV, a couple of pothose plants on the balcony. I didn't tell him, I wanted it to be a surprise when he returned. The morning he left, he packed my lunch and left it in the fridge. A thermos of goji berry water on the counter, a sticky note on it, "Remember to drink." I stared at that note for a long time. His handwriting was crooked, always had been. At the bottom, he'd drawn a little smiley face, identical to the ones on every note he'd ever left me. I told myself, he's still my Ethan. Once we were back in the city, back to our real life, he'd be himself again. This house, this whole stretch of time, was just a nightmare I'd wake up from. I had no idea the real nightmare was still waiting for me. After he left, I couldn't sleep. The old house was too quiet at night, an unnerving, heavy silence. No traffic hum, no delivery scooters buzzing outside, just the wind scraping the branches of the old locust tree against the window glass. I kept tossing in bed, restless and stifled. A text from Ethan sat on my phone, sent 2 hours earlier, * almost done here. Flight changed, I'll be back tomorrow morning, *, I replied, * I've got 6 places lined up. Waiting for you, *. He instantly sent back a sticker, a nodding bunny. I smiled and turned off the screen. Then I realized my face was wet. I touched my cheek, I'd been crying without noticing. I wiped the tears and told myself it was okay. 2 more days and he'd be back. We'd move. Everything would be fine. I drifted into a shallow sleep, full of anxious dreams. I was in my mother's old house, calling for her, but she wouldn't answer. I chased her down a hallway that stretched longer and darker the faster I ran. She vanished. I woke with a jolt. I didn't know what time it was. Pitch black outside. My mouth was dry, my throat sticky. I sat up, my nightshirt clinging to my back with sweat. I needed water. I grabbed the pitcher from my nightstand and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The floorboards were cold under my feet. The faucet ran noisily while I stood there, waiting for the pitcher to fill. The moment the water stopped, I heard it. A sound from the next room. Lily's room. A man's heavy breathing, low and ragged, mixed with the rhythmic creak of a bed frame, and a muffled, choked noise, like someone trying to cry out with a hand clamped over their mouth. My whole body locked up. My fingers tightened around the pitcher handle until my knuckles went white. I knew that breathing. Every single morning, before my father-in-law cleared his throat in the courtyard, there was always that same labored, phlegmy rasp of air scraping through his lungs. I'd heard it hundreds of times. There was no mistaking it. The pitcher slipped from my hand and clattered against the counter. A dull thud. The sounds behind the wall stopped. Dead silence. 3 seconds. Then footsteps, moving toward the door. Soft, but on the old wooden floor, every step was distinct. Creak. 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 The metallic click of a doorknob turning. I spun to run, and a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. The force slammed my head back against someone's chest. My scream was swallowed into a muffled whimper. Another arm snaked around my waist and dragged me backward down the hall, fast and hard. Behind me, the door to that room opened, a sliver of light slicing across the floor. I twisted my neck, catching a glimpse over my shoulder of a silhouette standing in the doorway. Naked. Backlit. I couldn't see a face, only an outline, slight, stooped, but planted there like a half-collapsed tower. I was hauled into the bedroom and thrown onto the mattress. The moment my back hit the bed, a palm pressed over my mouth and another hand pinned my wrist. I thrashed wildly, my nails raking across something. I heard a grunt of pain. Shoot, that voice. My eyes flew open. In the darkness, Ethan's face was inches from mine. He was back. But his flight wasn't until morning. He was wearing his jacket, still cold from outside, his shoes tracking bits of mud on the floor. He'd come back in a hurry, or he'd never left. Out in the hallway, footsteps approached. Slow. Heavy. Each step pressed a creak from the old boards. The footsteps stopped just outside our bedroom door. Someone stood there, not knocking, not entering, just waiting. I could hear his breathing, the same harsh rasp I'd heard through the wall. My heart felt like it was about to explode. Ethan's thumb stroked the inside of my wrist, a gesture meant to soothe, but his own hand was even colder than mine. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. A door at the end of the hall closed with a soft click. Ethan's rigid body collapsed. He gasped for air like a drowning man pulled to the surface, rolling onto his back on the mattress, covering his face with his hands. His shoulders heaved. I sat up and yanked his hands away. That was your father, wasn't it? My voice came out scraped raw. He didn't answer. I grabbed his collar and hauled him up. Ethan. That was your father. In your sister's room, in the middle of the night, your father. Wasn't it? His lips moved, but no words came. He slid off the bed and crumpled to his knees on the floor, gripping his hair with both hands, his body curling into a tight, agonized arc. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The rest of that night, I sat on the edge of the bed while he knelt on the floor. Outside, the sky shifted from black to charcoal to pale gray. A bird started singing somewhere. A dog barked in the distance. The village was waking up, business as usual. One thought looped endlessly in my head: he'd said he'd be back in the morning. But he'd returned in the dead of night, materializing behind me like a phantom who knew exactly what was about to happen. Had he always known? He hadn't come back to save me. He'd come back to silence me. The thought made the marrow in my bones turn to ice. After that night, the atmosphere in the house curdled. Ethan applied to work from home, claiming a project transition. He moved his computer into the bedroom and slept on a futon on the floor. He made up the bed himself. I didn't say a word, and he didn't ask. We orbited each other like two prisoners sharing a cell, careful not to touch. At meals, he stared at his plate, chopsticks never straying beyond the dish directly in front of him. If I walked past him, he flinched, not as if I might hit him, but as if I might finally ask the question he couldn't answer. I didn't ask. Partly because I didn't know where to start, and partly because I was terrified of the answer. What if he told me it wasn't the first time? What if he told me he'd known all along, even before we got married? On the weekend, my father-in-law went out as usual, puttering off on his rickety old scooter with a toolbox strapped to the back. From my window, he looked exactly like every other aging laborer heading to an early shift. In town, people called him a good, honest man. The kind of guy who worked hard and kept to himself. That good man had walked out of his daughter's room in the middle of the night with the same unhurried, casual stride, as if he'd just gotten up to use the bathroom. Lily didn't leave her room. The door stayed shut, the curtains drawn. When I cooked lunch, her door cracked open just enough for a hand to reach out and pull in the plate I'd left. I caught a glimpse of her wrist, a ring of purple bruises circling it, like someone had grabbed her hard. The door closed before I could react. Later the plate reappeared, empty except for half a piece of bread. I stood in the hallway staring at it. Should I knock and ask if she was okay? Or should I pretend I hadn't seen anything, pick up the plate, and walk away? I picked up the plate. I hated myself for it. I started noticing details I'd overlooked before. My laundry, which I distinctly remembered hanging facing left, was always turned to the right when I brought it in. I asked Ethan if he'd touched it. He looked up from his screen, confused, and said no. Outside the frosted bathroom door, a shadow would drift past whenever I showered. I used to think it was tree branches moving in the wind, but tree branches don't vanish the moment the water shuts off. I found a gray, threadbare undershirt in the laundry basket, not mine, not Ethan's. A sleeveless old man's undershirt, collar stretched, yellowed under the arms, neatly folded and placed right on top. It didn't feel like an accident. I picked it up, held it for 3 seconds, then dropped it on the floor. That night, it was gone. I didn't ask. There was only one old man in the house. I started locking the bedroom door, wedging a chair under the handle. Every time I turned over in bed, Ethan's eyes opened. We'd exchange a look in the darkness, then look away, neither of us speaking. One night, I woke to the sound of the doorknob being twisted from outside. Soft. A pause. Then again. The metal squeaked, the chair leg wobbled against the floor. I sat up, hard hammering, staring at the door. Ethan called out, his voice eerily calm, "Lily. Your sister-in-law's asleep. We'll talk tomorrow." The sound stopped. Footsteps retreated. After a long silence, I whispered, "Was that your father?" Ethan stared at the floor. "Don't overthink it. Just sleep." He didn't deny it. The next morning, I called the agent. "Don't bother with more viewings. The one bedroom closest to my office, I'll take it. I'll sign the lease this afternoon." "When do you want to move in?" the agent asked. "As soon as possible." I hung up. Ethan was standing behind me. He'd heard the whole call. He didn't say, "Don't go." He didn't say, "I'm coming with you." He just stood there, like a tree that had weathered so many storms it no longer knew how to fall. The move was set for 3 days later. I told myself I just had to survive those 3 days. I worked late, came home late, avoided the house as much as I could. My father-in-law was cheerful every evening, setting steaming dishes on the table, urging me to eat more. His braised fish was genuinely delicious, the sauce rich and savory. Ethan had once told me his father used to help out in a construction site kitchen. The old man acted as if nothing had happened. Maybe he truly didn't care. He probably assumed his son would cover for him, just like he always had. After all, his son had been keeping his secrets for years and had never let him down. He reached across the table to put a piece of fish in my bowl. "Eat up, Emma. You're too thin." The glossy, sauce-slicked fish skin stared up at me. My stomach turned. On the third evening, I came home to find Lily alone on the sofa. The TV was off. A piece of paper lay on the coffee table in front of her. She didn't look up. "Emma, come here. I have something to show you." Her voice was flat, but there was an eerie steadiness to it, the calm of someone who has rehearsed a moment for a long time. I put down my bag and picked up the paper. A pregnancy test report. Positive. Dated a week ago. "I'm pregnant," she said, her tone as neutral as a weather report. "It's Ethan's. This family doesn't need you anymore. You should leave." I set the report back on the table. She said it staring straight into my eyes, chin lifted, the same defiant posture she'd always used to provoke me. But I noticed her hands in her lap, fingers interlaced and squeezed so hard the knuckles were white. She was wearing an oversized hoodie, the sleeves pulled down past her wrists. At the edge of the cuff, faint bruises peeked out, old and new layered together. "Say that again," I said. "I'm pregnant with my brother's child. Leave." I let the silence stretch. Then I pulled out my phone, scrolled deep into my photo album, and turned the screen toward her. "This is a medical report from 3 months ago. Your brother. Azoospermia. Confirmed." She stared at the screen. The blood drained from her face so completely, it was like watching color bleed out of a photograph. "That night," I said, my voice soft but every word a hammered nail, "I saw everything. The person in your room, it wasn't him. It was your father." She didn't speak. "The baby is his." The tears finally spilled over, sliding down her cheeks and dropping onto her clenched hands, onto the bruises. She didn't wipe them away. "I thought I could drive you away," she whispered, voice buried in her throat. "I thought it would work." I reached out slowly, folded the pregnancy report in half, and placed it back on the table. "And if you drove me away? Then what? You stay here alone." She didn't answer. "Does Ethan know you're pregnant?" She shook her head. "What do you want to do about it?" "I don't know." I took her hand. It was icy, the bones delicate as a bird's. Under my palm, those bruises felt hard and knotted. "If you want to end the pregnancy," I said, "I'll go with you. She finally looked up at me, her face wrecked, eyes rabbit red. Her lips parted as if to speak. Then the front gate clanged. A key scraped in the lock, heavy boots on concrete. "Lily." Her father's voice boomed from the kitchen, cheerful, almost jovial. "I bought fish. Making braised fish tonight." Lily's face went paper white. She scrubbed her sleeve across her face, stood up, and yelled, "Got it." Then she turned to me, her voice dropped to a fierce, urgent whisper. "After dinner tonight, you leave. Don't come back." In the kitchen, the faucet ran, and a fish tail slapped against the steel sink. Thump. Thump. I didn't leave. Not because I was brave. Because the alternative was leaving her alone. The next day, we met at a small Hunan restaurant in town. She ordered a table full of food but didn't touch any of it. Sunlight streamed through the window, bright and indifferent, while she stared outside at the people passing by as if she were watching something very far away. And then, quietly, she told me everything. About Ethan's mother running off when he was 7, and their father's vow never to trust a woman again. About her own mother, a kind woman who married into the family and loved Ethan like her own, diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. Her father had accused her of flirting with the young doctor and pulled her out of the hospital to die at home. She wasted away for 3 months, screaming through the nights in pain, while he said there was no point in going back to the hospital. Lily was 15, kneeling beside the bed, holding her mother's hand as it slowly went cold. From that day on, she never called him Dad again, but she never fought back either. Later, he found her mother's notebook, nothing but grocery lists and a few recipes, the last entry reading, "Lily loves sweet and sour ribs." He threw it on the floor and called it a secret diary, proof of an affair. He needed her to be a villain. At 18, Lily fell for a boy in her class. He walked her home once and held her hand in the alley. Her father saw. The next day, he confiscated her phone, locked her in the house, and went to the school to tell the principal she was promiscuous. The boy transferred schools. Then one night, her father drank, unlocked her door, and came in. After the first time, she said, "I crouched in the shower the whole night. The water was running, and I scrubbed and scrubbed, but I couldn't feel clean." The next morning, he made her a bowl of noodles and said, "Don't go hanging around those trashy boys anymore." As if nothing had happened. It wasn't just once. It was a few times a week. Whenever he drank. Whenever he felt like it. She tried to run, got as far as the county bus station before he reported her as mentally unstable and had the police bring her back. He locked her in the basement for 3 days without food. She tried to go to the police once, but her father drank with the local officers. They sent her home. He told everyone she had paranoid delusions. He even got a doctor to prescribe her sleeping pills. The neighbors all praised him for being such a devoted father. He threatened to dig up her mother's grave if she ever tried to tell anyone again. Even if he went to prison, he said, he'd make sure she never had a moment's peace as long as he was alive. So she gave up. She learned to split herself in two, one body that endured, and one mind that floated up near the ceiling and watched. What survived, she said, wasn't me. I listened without interrupting. I was afraid that if I said a single word, she would stop. She'd carried all of this inside her for 5 years with no outlet. Her voice was eerily flat, as if recounting a story that had happened to someone else. At the worst parts, she even smiled a little. "You know what I hated most?" she said. "Not the pain. It was his snoring afterward, coming through the wall. I'd lie in my own bed and think that sound was the filthiest thing I'd ever heard. She finished, picked up her glass of lukewarm lemon water, and took a sip. I hate him, she said. She wasn't talking about her father. I hate Ethan. I hate that he got to pretend nothing happened. That he got to go to college, fall in love, get married, buy an apartment in the city, live a normal life. The day he left for university, I stood at the village entrance and waved. He told me, "Take care of yourself, Lily." I smiled and nodded, thinking, what about me? What am I supposed to do? She set the glass down with a thud. So I decided he should rot in the mud with me. I wanted to break you two apart, not because I hated you. At first, I thought you were just another fool being lied to by a man. But then I saw the way you stood up to me, the fire in your eyes. I used to have that. It got ground out of me a long time ago. And my father has started looking at you. I know that look. He looked at me the same way, back then. Ethan can't protect you. He's a paper tiger. Leave, Emma. Well, you still can. What about you? I asked. She looked down at her stomach, her hand resting lightly on the fabric of her hoodie. I don't know, she said again. Every night I dream of a child crying, faceless, reaching out its hands for me. I wake up and feel this small hardness inside me, and I tell myself there's a heartbeat, but then I remember how it got there, and I want to claw it out of my body. Her nails bit into her palms. I pried her fingers open and held her hand. If you want to terminate, I said, I'll go with you. If you want to go to the police, I'll help you. The police won't do anything. They will. You don't understand. She looked at me with a terror that went bone deep. I'll never be free of him. He's lived in this town his whole life. The cops are his drinking buddies. The neighbors are his friends. Everyone thinks he's a saint. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, almost to herself, I keep thinking he'll die someday. A construction accident. A drunken fall. Men fall off scaffolding all the time. I've been waiting for that day for 5 years. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't a curse. It was the only thing keeping her alive, waiting for the universe to do what no one else would. I paid the bill. We stood outside the restaurant, the autumn wind biting, whipping her hair across her face. She pulled her jacket tighter and started walking back toward the old house. After a few steps, she turned. When do you get the keys to your new place? Day after tomorrow. Then leave the day after tomorrow. And don't come back. I watched her retreating figure, so thin and small against the gray sky, and suddenly I understood. That afternoon she'd sat on the sofa in her brother's blouse, deliberately provoking me, waiting for me to explode. She hadn't been attacking me. She had been screaming for help in the only language she had left. That night, I was jolted awake by a sharp, metallic click. A key turning in the bedroom lock. A sliver of light bled under the door. My hand shot out to the other side of the bed, empty. Ethan wasn't there. He'd said he was working late, sleeping at the office. The chair I'd wedged under the knob scraped backward half an inch. Ethan can't give you a child, slurred the voice from the other side, soaked in alcohol, but it's all the same Sullivan blood. The door burst open. The chair toppled over with a crash. I scrambled backward against the headboard, my hand closing around the base of the ceramic lamp. A dark silhouette lumbered toward me, reeking of liquor and sweat and the sour dust of a construction site. I swung the lamp. The shade shattered. He stumbled but didn't fall, then lunged, slamming me to the floor. My head cracked against the wood, and my vision whited out. He was muttering about bloodlines and heirs, his weight crushing me. I clawed, scratched, fought, my nails raked his face, and he backhanded me so hard my ears rang. Footsteps thundered down the hall. Lily burst through the door, screaming. She grabbed the keyboard off my desk and smashed it across his back. Keys flew everywhere, plastic clattering like hail. He grunted in pain but didn't let go, his elbows snapping back and catching her shoulder, shoving her into the wall. Then the front gate screeched open, that familiar, tortured metal groan echoing through the house. Ethan stood in the doorway, laptop bag sliding off his shoulder and hitting the floor. He took in the scene, me pinned to the ground, bleeding from the corner of my mouth, my clothes torn, his father's face raked with scratches, his sister clutching half a shattered keyboard. "Ethan!" I screamed. "Help me!" He ran toward us. 3 steps. Then his father turned his head and roared, "Don't you dare! Stand right there!" Ethan stopped. His feet rooted to the floor. His face was a mask of that ancient, marrow-deep terror, the terror of an 8-year-old boy cowering in a corner while a belt whistled through the air. I stared up at him from the floor, the wood grain pressing into my skull, and I felt my heart go cold. Not with disappointment, with a complete, body-wide chill, as if someone had injected ice water into my veins. Every time he'd been silent, every time he'd said she's young, she's had it hard, don't overthink it, had been a rehearsal. When forced to choose, he would always pick the safest path. Lily went very quiet. Her frantic, desperate energy drained away, leaving her face utterly blank, like a frozen lake. She turned and walked out of the room. A moment later, she came back. She was holding a length of coarse rope, the one from the courtyard, used for hanging laundry, thick as a thumb and frayed. She walked silently behind her father. He was still shouting at Ethan, still pinning my wrists. She looped the rope around his neck and pulled. She pulled with her whole body, knuckles white, her face contorted, the rope digging into her own palms. "Dad," she said, her voice coming from somewhere far away, "let's go see Mom, okay?" He let go of me, clawing at the rope, his face turning purple, making wet, choking sounds. Lily's face was streaming with tears, but she was smiling, weeping and smiling at once. "We'll go together. We won't live anymore. Mom's been waiting so long." I scrambled up and grabbed her arms, my voice a hoarse wreck. "Let go. Let go. He's not worth throwing your life away. Let go." She shook her head wildly, tears flying. "I've waited 5 years. I've waited for this for 5 years. Not like this." I pried her fingers off one by one. "We want him to stand trial. We want him to suffer alive. Dying is too easy, your mother deserves justice, not another victim." At the word "mother," her grip faltered. Just a fraction. I pulled the rope from her hands, and she collapsed to the floor, letting out a raw, keening wail that sounded like it was tearing itself out of her chest. She sobbed with her whole body, shaking, years of silence erupting all at once. Her father curled on the floor, clutching his throat, gasping. I looked at the doorway. Ethan was still there, frozen, tears streaming down his face, watching it all like a movie about someone else's life. "Get over here and help," I yelled. He jolted as if shocked, stumbled over, and knelt down. With shaking hands, he used the same rope to bind his father's wrists and ankles. He couldn't tie a simple knot, it took him 3 tries. He never once looked at his father's face. His father rasped, "You ungrateful brat." Ethan's hands paused. Then kept tying. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My fingers were trembling so badly I had to press the numbers 3 times. When the operator answered, my voice was strangely steady. I gave the address, stated the nature of the emergency, answered the questions. Sirens swelled in the distance, threading through the narrow village streets, growing closer. Outside, the sky was still dark, but a faint gray line was bleeding up from the horizon. Dawn was coming. As the police burst through the door, I glanced back. Ethan was kneeling beside his father, still trembling. He looked up and met my eyes. In that look, I saw terror, gratitude, and a question I read 100 times before I finally understood. "You'll still want me, won't you?" I looked away. After they took John Sullivan away, I contacted a lawyer named 𝐃𝐄𝐒𝐂, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in both family law and criminal victim advocacy. She listened to the whole story, took off her glasses, cleaned them, and said, "I'm taking this case." Lily locked herself in her room for a day. I left meals outside her door, the plates came back empty. On the 3rd morning, she emerged. She'd put on a clean white t-shirt and pulled her hair back. Her eyes were still swollen, but her expression had changed. The prickly, combative energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, exhausted stillness. "Will you come with me somewhere?" she asked. She meant the county hospital. The termination was scheduled for 10 in the morning. In the waiting room, as she filled out the forms, her hand didn't shake. Mine did. Before she went into the operating room, she turned back. "You'll be out here. I'll be right here." She nodded and pushed through the pale green doors. The procedure took over an hour. I paced the hallway, reading the labels on every drink in the vending machine. When she came out, her face was bloodless, sweat plastering her hair to her forehead. She moved slowly, a nurse guiding her to the observation area. I handed her a thermos of warm water. She took it in both hands, those hands were still trembling faintly, and drank. "Does it hurt?" I asked. "Not as much as I thought." She paused. "Lighter, somehow." I knew she wasn't talking about the surgery. We sat in the observation room for a long time. "I'm sorry," she said eventually. "You didn't do anything to me." "Yes, I did," she said, turning to look at me. "Messing with your things, wearing your clothes, saying those awful things. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to hurt him. Ethan. When I was a teenager, I had a crush on him," she said. Her side profile was calm under the harsh fluorescent lights, the ghost of a smile on her lips. "You know how it is. A boy in the next class, decent looking, plays basketball, hands you a bottle of water once. You remember it for years, even though nothing ever happened. That was him. After my mom died, I was in middle school, he was in high school. Dad would drink and beat him, and afterward, Ethan would come to my room with a glass of warm milk and tell me not to be scared. Back then, I really believed he'd protect me. Then you know what happened." She paused, her thumb picking at the edge of the paper cup. "He's not a bad person, my brother. He's just so scared. Too scared to do anything. Too scared to protect his own sister. Too scared to even admit it's happening." I didn't say anything. "Do you know when the first time I was with him was?" She turned, and her gaze was eerily serene. "The night of your 3-year anniversary." My mind went blank. That night, I'd waited 2 hours in a restaurant, in a new dress, makeup done. His phone was dead. I called his roommate, who said he'd left in the afternoon and didn't know where he went. It rained that evening. I stood outside the restaurant under a broken umbrella until 10. The next day, he came to me with a bruised face and bloodshot eyes. He said his father had hit him. Showed me the welts on his arms. I believed him. I held him. I told him it was okay, it was just an anniversary, we'd have plenty more. But that night, his father had called him home, saying something was wrong with Lily. When he got there, nothing was wrong. His father was drinking, Lily's door was open. His father told him he was too timid, not a real man. Time to toughen you up. Ethan refused. His father said, if you don't, I'll marry her off to that old widower in the next town. And Ethan knew his father would do it. He stood in that living room for a long time. Then he walked into her room. I didn't fight it, Lily said. Not because I was too scared. I just thought, it's always going to be someone. At least it's him, she looked down. But that night, the last little bit of love I had for him died. He was worse than my father. My father is a monster, you can hate a monster cleanly. But Ethan knew it was wrong. He cried. He said he was sorry. And he did it anyway. That's a different kind of evil. Her eyes were dry now. The boy who brought me warm milk, I buried him that night. And then I watched him move on, fall in love with you, treat you like a queen, as if none of it had ever happened. He got to forget. I never could. I didn't want to break you two apart because I hated you, Emma. I wanted to stop you from becoming me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Ethan, Emma, please. I need to see you, I met him in a small park near the police station. The ginkgo trees were bare. He was sitting on a bench, thin, unshaven, eyes sunken, wearing that old frayed shirt from college. He stood up the moment he saw me, almost stumbling. I pulled the divorce papers from my bag and placed them on the bench. He didn't look at them. He looked at me. Emma, sign. His lip trembled. I know you hate me. I know I don't deserve you. But what I felt for you was real. Which part? I stared into his eyes. Our 3-year anniversary. I waited 2 hours. You told me your father hit you. But you weren't being beaten for my sake. You were being his tool. The blood drained from his face. You know. I know. He broke down, tears falling onto the cement. I grew up being hit by him. Belts, sticks, his fists. When I was 8, he threw me against a wall because I forgot his foot bath. After my mom left, he got worse. I swore I'd never become him. He looked up, eyes red. But I did. You didn't become him, I said. You never beat anyone. I hurt Lily. I was worse. She was my little sister. I used to fight kids who bullied her. I got my nose broken for her. And then I became the one who hurt her most. His voice cracked and echoed in the empty park. I stood there, watching him cry. 8 years. The library glances in college, the warm crepes in winter, the sticky notes on the fridge, the wedding ring trembling onto my finger. All of it was real. My love was real. But so was the moment his father yelled, "Stand there," and he froze. So was the night he walked into his sister's room because he was too scared not to. "Ethan," I said. He looked up. "The difference between you and your father is that he never felt guilt. You feel it, you drown in it, you hate yourself, and then you do nothing. You apologize and nothing changes. That's what broke me. Not what you did, but what you couldn't do." I crouched down to his level. I don't hate you. You are a deeply pitiable man. But I can't give you my life anymore. I stood up, left the papers beside him, and walked away across the fallen ginkgo leaves. I didn't look back. Back in the city, the first thing I did was close our joint account and open a new one. The card was pale blue with a little flower on it. I put it in the slot in my wallet where our photo used to be. I calculated exactly what he'd put into the down payment on our apartment and wired it back to him, every cent, with records saved. I called my mom on the weekend after the divorce was finalized. My hand shook as I dialed. It rang 5 times. Just as I was about to hang up, she answered. Hello. Her voice was hoarse. Mom. Silence. Then I heard her sniff. Mom, I got a divorce. A long, long pause. Then she started crying, half sobbing, half scolding, calling him a bastard, his whole family rotten, yelling at me for not listening to her in the first place. And then the scolding dissolved into pure weeping. I'm just glad you're out, she finally said, her voice shattered. Come home sometime. Okay. You won't block me again. No, she cried harder. I sat on my sofa that night, watching the city lights blink on one by one, and then off. In the first month after the divorce, I lost a few pounds. But I slept better. No more listening for footsteps, no more scissors under the pillow. By the 3rd month, I'd gained the weight back. My mom added me on social media again and sent me a health article every morning. Women should eat more red dates, sleep before 11. She only ever sent links, never voice messages, terrified I'd find her annoying again. I read every single one. 5 months later, I got a text from an unknown number. He got 12 years. The final charges were rape and forcible assault. I gave a DNA sample. They matched it to the fetal tissue. With your witness statement and the photos of my injuries, the evidence held. I've left town. I'm in a small city down south now, working at a convenience store. The owner is a nice woman, doesn't ask about my past. I'm learning to work the register, stock shelves. Last night I did my first night shift alone. When it's quiet, I pull a chair outside and look at the stars. The stars here are brighter than back home. Thank you for grabbing my hands that night. I won't contact you again. Take care. Lily, asterisk. I texted back, asterisk take care. You're going to be okay, asterisk I saved the screenshot in my important documents folder. I thought that was the end. Then my phone buzzed again. An electronic legal letter. Ethan was suing me for an equal share of the city apartment. I turned off the screen and stood by the window, watching the traffic flow like a river of lights. I thought of the boy in the library who slipped me a note, asterisk you have a beautiful smile. Can I get to know you, asterisk I thought of the man who had stood frozen while his father pinned me to the floor. They were the same person. I thought of the shirt he never wore, the one I'd folded and left in our closet when I walked away. He hadn't even asked for it. And now he was sending lawyers. I picked up my phone and called Catherine. Miss Cole. It's Emma. There's been a new development. My voice was calm. This time, we're not giving an inch.